For you. Let's though move on and return back to our other topic under discussion today. That's the impact, the legal impact from the dam collapse for BHP. And for that, I'm joined by our Law TV contributor and KLL Gates mining partner, Robert Milbourne. He's in our Brisbane studio for you. Robert, welcome to you. What's intriguing but also quite startling about this, and it jumps out from your own summary of findings as you see it now, you know, the idea of benchmarking, can we maybe start with that? Let's just understand. You have a first world miner teaming up with a partner in the country like Brazil, and they talk about their safety standards according to local practice, not world's best. How did that happen? How was that allowed to just become the accepted practice?
Oh, hi, Carson. And look, the issue about standards for the mining industry, I think, will become more and more important as we evolve, I think, as a group of interested parties in the mining industry. I mean, the reality is mining is around 10% of global GDP. It's absolutely enormous. We may be having a downturn globally and certainly here in Australia, but the activity remains, and Samarco is an example of the lessons that we need to be paying attention to how mining operations are regulated. The Samarco case is particularly interesting in that you have two of the world's largest mining firms, BHP and Vale, working together. They have an independent management team. They appointed a professional team to run Samarco, and Samarco was regulated according to Brazilian regulations, not according to international best practice. And the reality that we seem to have, in my view, Carson, is that there is no defined set of international best practice standards for the mining industry. So you have a situation in which BHP and Vale are being responsible for a disaster which they themselves didn't have direct managerial control over.
At that point, though, okay, so at that point, though, Robert, to acknowledge, though, that there's no internationally acceptable benchmark or definition or guidebook for it, it would be empty rhetoric then to say in a statement that that's indeed what you were working to benchmark against if no one could then look to that principle. As you say, it currently doesn't exist.
Yeah, I mean, look, the world does not have best practice in the mining industry, and I think that is a big problem. We have every state and province in Australia, Canada, the US regulating mining differently. Every country regulates it differently, but the procedures for how you would manage a tailings dam shouldn't vary as much as the laws and regulations vary. So we do have a problem in that regard, without doubt.
And are the industry wise to this, and is there some kind of a collective, as you say, push now on knocking heads together, coming up with one? Where on that are we at?
Yeah, look, we don't have an adequate movement in that regard. There is something called the International Council of Mining and Metals, which has about a group of the 20 top mining firms, and they look at aspects of this. In Australia, we have the Minerals Council of Australia that looks at aspects of Australian regulatory policy, but there is no one body that has worked on developing international best practice standards and then holding companies accountable against those standards. And in my view, there's a need for that.
That said, just to reference the independent management arrangements that were on the ground and playing out here, it's always been said you go into a foreign market, you team up with a local entity. They know the lie of the land, they have the street smarts, they'll get you the access. How problematic would it be if you had to pull back from that by dint of a need to keep an arm's length from what could be third world approaches?
Yeah, well, look, wherever you go, whether it's Mongolia or Mozambique or PNG, you tend to find major mining houses having local partners, and those local partners are relevant in understanding local culture and custom. But for the most part, the experience that I've seen is that major houses like Vale and BHP do aspire to international best practice, and they don't reduce their standards necessarily to those of maybe the lowest common denominator in those countries. But it is, in terms of political management, political risk management, pretty standard that you'll have a local partner.
What's, as it were, the moral of this? When, had it occurred here, it's been said in the aftermath, with that number of fatalities, there would have been no option but for the company to immediately, almost on the hour, be working at some kind of, establishing cause first and their degree of liability. Instead, it's been a hand-wringing process and a very delayed final announcement made. What do you make of that? Significant loss of life.
Well, yeah, look, I think the Samarco disaster will be globally relevant for a while to come. It is, by all accounts, the worst environmental disaster in Brazil's history, and it may be the worst environmental disaster in South America's history. This is a very serious event.
Do you see strains of BP, Gulf of Mexico, and what has turned out to be a fairly one-sided hit on BP? And all the provisioning in the world wasn't enough, really, for the claims that have been now made against it.
But at this point, it's difficult to know what the liability is that Samarco itself has, and then the excess liability that the joint venture owners will have. I've seen numbers on the order of $1 billion. I suspect that when we look at the overall environmental cleanup obligations now going 300 kilometers from the source of the dam burst out to the Atlantic Ocean, that's an incredible amount of area that will need to be cleaned up. So the costs are going to be very high, and I imagine that the prosecutions in Brazil and the investigations that will follow from them will have consequences around the world for BHP and for Vale. And I believe that we will hopefully be learning very significant lessons around how joint ventures themselves are managed. You know, we have a situation where it's 50-50, and that might change itself in the future.
Interesting. Okay, Rob, well, I'm sure this will be returning to, but for now, thanks for your first impressions over it. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Carson.
Our mining correspondent and our Law TV correspondent, to be more precise, and certainly the mining expert from KLL Gates there, the mining partner, Robert Milbourne, for you. That's our show. Look forward to seeing you in 7 days.